Neighborhood History Channel, where we bring you history in a friendly, amicable manner, neighborly manner, 24/7, 365 or 366 days a year. Welcome to our Q&A, the first one of two that we do every weekend here at the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel, 6 p.m. Eastern every Friday and Saturday. And for the next hour or so, I, History Hefner, although I'm not wearing my usual smoking jacket today because it's just way too hot right now, will be guiding you through answering all of your questions related to history and social studies, considering liking, subscribing, and if you really want to help us grow and help the channel, you can consider joining or donating or doing a super chat, whatever you want. I really appreciate all of that. But welcome to the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel. For the next hour, I will be answering all of your questions related to history and social studies. And tomorrow we'll be going again, 6 p.m. Eastern. After we're done here, around a little after 7 p.m. Eastern, we're going to go over to Instagram, and if anyone's interested, they can join me there for a little while, and I will have after hours where I'll be answering more questions and reacting to more of your queries about history and social studies. And then Sunday, please be sure to vote on the poll here on YouTube for our channel topic for our live stream lecture. Not sure what we're going to do yet, but we'll figure it out. Looking forward to seeing you guys there, and looking forward to the next hour here, where happy August. We are now 8 months into into the year, and we are in the home stretch of 2025, and it's a great way to start August, to be with all of you and to answer all of your questions regarding history and social studies. I really appreciate all of the supporters we have on this channel, my wonderful moderators who do such a great job handling the chat, sharing social media, promoting the channel, and encouraging all of you to like and subscribe and to ask whatever questions you want, managing comments by everyone, directing newcomers where they should go, all of that great stuff. We've been doing these live streams for just over a year, and it's been a really, really great honor to do it with all of you and to answer all of your questions and learn from you guys. And hopefully you've learned something from me, and probably you have if you keep coming back. So really appreciate seeing you. Kurgan, hello. Kurgan has one of those nice badges, and his badge is Nicholas I, the Russian Tsar, because he is a member. So if you join and become a member, you can get a badge just like Kurgan does. You can also get early access and extra videos. Every Monday and Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern, I have long-form videos dropping. I'm really excited about today's long-form video, and that is all about Macbeth, the Scottish play. So I think you guys will really enjoy that, as it's a topic that I didn't know a huge amount about, but I've been reading about more because today is the anniversary of Dunsinane, one of the biggest battles in Scottish history, where Macbeth was defeated by Malcolm III and Siward of Northumbria. And obviously Macbeth, who is a real historical character, he was actually the real King of Scotland, and eventually, of course, became the subject of William Shakespeare's play. And so my video today will be about the real Macbeth. I'll be separating Shakespeare's fiction from what actually happened from Scottish fact, and explaining why Shakespeare mended and crafted and changed so much about the narrative in the Scottish play. But yeah, that I have long-form videos like that dropping every Monday and Friday, so go please check those out, and shorts here on the channel every day about history, social studies, and the like. Welcome to the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel. If you like history, then you're in the right place. May I suggest that you may consider liking and subscribing and dropping a topic or comment or question you have about history in the chat, and I'll be sure to answer it in a timely manner. We're going to go for another hour or so, so let me see what I've got in the chat. It's so hot that the smoking jacket eviscerated. Might as well have. I mean, I love wearing that thing, but it's going to be at least another month or two until I probably can again. Hello, Steve. Good to see you as always. If Cromwell lived longer, would England have continued to be a republic? I don't really think England was a republic under Cromwell. I think Cromwell did everything he could to basically kind of take the throne, not call himself a king, govern with parliament, but he dismissed them several times. He got tired of them, and then he passed power to his son. So it totally wasn't a crown, but he had seized power, and he wanted to make sure that his family held on to it. So I don't know how else you can consider Cromwell except a king. So my favorite books we read in high school were Beowulf and Macbeth. Macbeth is awesome. Yes, Beowulf, 5th century tale from Old English, one of the most famous Old English, early Anglo-Saxon literature pieces, one of the most famous epic poems in history. And of course, Macbeth is one of Shakespeare's most violent and shortest tragedies. Tragedies because they end poorly, comedies like The Merchant of Venice because they have a good ending. That's why they call them tragedies and comedies in Shakespeare's day. Is there any truth to the rumor that a Roman legion disappeared in Scotland? Probably. There was actually a successful military campaign several times in what the Romans called Caledonia, but they never amounted to much because the Scottish were just very efficient fighters. It was very hard. It was easy to attack the lowlands. It was hard to control them, and it was almost impossible to attack the highlands. And so when you understand the difference between the lowlands and the highlands, and the Picts, the Jutes of the areas of Strathclyde, it was very difficult for the Romans to ever fully control Scotland. So in the 2nd century, they just stopped going in there. But it's very possible a Roman legion did get lost. Did Romeo abuse Juliet? No. Jill Biden is a bit of a Lady Macbeth. Yeah, I've heard people say that before. Any woman who is powerful, strong, and in charge is considered Lady Macbeth, when the real Lady Macbeth and the real Macbeth himself weren't nearly as vitriolic and violent as Shakespeare made them out to be, and there's a reason for that. And if you go and watch the video later today, you will find out that reason. Is Brigitte Macron really a man? You know, I was just listening and hearing some of this. I have no idea. I don't think so. I think it's been a right wing conspiracy for a while. The French haven't done it. The French, I was going to say royal because they do act like royals, but the French first couple hasn't done a very good job of dissuading the idea. And I'm just kind of leaving it out in the ether. It is an interesting conspiracy theory and one of the most popular of our day. I'm going to err on the side of caution and say, no, she is not a man, but it's not impossible that she could be a man, I guess. Oh, you're in Strychlide, Kurgan? Am I saying it right? I hope I am. Well, that's awesome. Then you must know a lot about Scottish history, or at least a lot of, I mean, Scotland's one of the most beautiful places in the world. I would definitely love to visit there. So yeah, thank you for joining us all the way from Scotland. We have people from all over the world. No, she was 14, Steve, and so is he. There's a difference, especially when the people are around the same age. If you look at laws, that's how it works. Yeah. I don't know what your point is, Steve, in bringing that up. It's just you don't like what I've said in the past about Muhammad and age, so whatever. Mary, hello. Thank you for leaving your like. I really appreciate it. Please be sure to like. It helps the algorithm. It helps the channel grow, all of that great stuff. Why did Ireland end up basically just growing potatoes as a monocrop? Can you talk about the Irish potato famine? Sure. So basically, potatoes were grown in Central and South America for a long time, but they were less toxic and more fruitful in Irish soil. The Irish farmland, the greenery, all of that was perfect for the growing of potatoes. So potato farming became one of the biggest habits in Irish society and culture. And eventually, of course, this led to the Irish population being associated with potatoes and potatoes being a huge part of Irish culture and culinary art and all of that stuff. But most likely, the problem was that the English continually demanded a certain amount of extract of Irish potatoes, especially after Oliver Cromwell, who I mentioned earlier, conquered all of Ireland in the 1600s. All English kings had tried, and it took a Lord Protector who wasn't a king but kind of acted like a king for them to actually successfully take over Ireland in the 1600s. From that time on, England extracted a certain amount of Irish potato crop for centuries to come. This extraction, even during the times of drought and famine, could lead to starvation for the Irish people. This caused a series of different famines, the worst of which was in the 1840s and 50s, where a huge amount of the Irish population decreased, either through death and disease or through a lot of them emigrating, most of them to the United States, where they could get their own food and not have it taken by the English. So there you go. It's one of the huge reasons of the great animus between the English and the Irish that lasted this day. But there you go. Hope, hello. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. Furkan from Germany. Hey, I'll take hate from Germany. Just don't do German historical hate because it's pretty bad. Was William Wallace hung, drawn, and quartered, or more mere Scottish propaganda? Probably something to that matter. They did do that drawing and quartering as a way to basically make an example out of someone. We know at the very least that he was beheaded. I'm going to say that it's an easy bet that he was beheaded. Whether he was drawn or quartered exactly the way the movie depicts it and talks about it, I don't know. Although Braveheart is a great movie, it is extremely historically inaccurate. As one of my best friendly neighborhood historians, and you can be one too if you like and subscribe, Shuriken always points out kilts didn't exist in Scottish culture at that time. At least were not prevalently worn, so it doesn't make any sense, the famous kilt scene when they basically just exposed themselves to the British, or the English. So, yeah. I don't know. I think that he probably was tortured. He certainly was tortured, certainly was beheaded, drawn and quartered, most likely. It makes sense for the English to do that, but he was not killed when Longshanks was dying. Longshanks was still more years. Longshanks is the one who was responsible for capturing him. Robert the Bruce was not a traitor, and Robert the Bruce is actually the real Braveheart because he saw Wallace's rebellion out to fulfillment with the successful victory in 1314. I think it's the Battle of Stamford Bridge. But yeah, okay. Uh, okay, let me see. Hope, hello. Hars, oh no, that's not good. I'm so sorry. I hope you're okay. We're gonna miss you here, Hars. Are English really just Germanic people from Central Europe? Some of them are, but they're a mix of different Germanic tribes, native Celtic populations, and the Rome and the and a leftover contingent of a Roman population, the Latins, who most of them went into the West and settled the Welsh lands, and so that's why the Welsh consider themselves a distinct people from the English. Scotland is a geologist's dream. It's so beautiful. The father of geology, James Hutton, hails from Scotland. The natural landscape inspired him to study rock formations further. Yeah, Scotland's absolutely beautiful when it comes to stuff like that. How did they get the stones for Stonehenge, considering they were mined hundreds of miles away? This is a big question about megaliths and giant stone structures all over the world. How did primitive and ancient peoples who mostly had not invented the wheel or had barely just invented the wheel, how were they able to actually get the giant stones required to build megaliths like Baalbek or the pyramids in Africa or Central America or Stonehenge in northern England, or it's in Scotland. I always forget if it's northern England or Scotland. But basically, I think when you have a lot of manpower basically being forced to do this over a long period of time, you can basically move those mountains. According to AI, 5 minutes ago in Romeo and Juliet, Juliet is 13, almost 14. Yes, she's about to turn 14. Steve, I don't get your point with this. I never do, and I've never liked it. You're just trying to prove a bigger point that I don't agree with. And yes, please follow us there. Thank you, Hars, my wonderful moderator, for putting that in. His body parts were sent to 4 quarters of Britain and his head was put on London Bridge. That's what the movie says. I don't know if that's actually true. No battles of Stamford Bridge was when Harold Godwinson defeated, Harold II defeated Harold Hardrada. I always get my English battles confused. There's Hastings, Stamford Bridge, there's Stirling. Yes. There's one other one, though. It's where the Scottish, under Robert the Bruce, were able to defeat the English. And it wasn't Stirling. Yeah. Harold Godwinson was the son of the Earl of Wessex, I think, who basically convinced Edward the Confessor to make his son king. He came to power and was overthrown, the last Anglo-Saxon king. Yes, Bannockburn, the Battle of Bannockburn, 1314. How did Joan of Arc rise up to be a leader? What was her upbringing like? Why and how did she become a fearsome leader? Harald, yes, Harald Hardrada. And in no way affiliated, good to see you. No, it was Harold II. There had already been a King Harold in English history. How did Joan of Arc rise up to be leader? What was her upbringing like? What and how did she become a fearsome leader? Basically, Joan of Arc was a peasant girl. I'm going to be doing a video on her pretty soon, who basically believed that she had heard visions where God had told her that she needed to help the French army. God and the Virgin Mary had encouraged her to rally the French, become a leader in their army, and basically convince and defeat the English. Joan was feisty, independent, strong-willed, and a bunch of constituents of the French resistance was willing to follow her, even for just the sake of her being opposed to the English and willing to fight about it. The fact that you have a young girl who's willing to go out there and die in battle is shameful to men who have been cowardly and been defeated over and over again. So the coward French army, not coward in C-O-W-A-R-D, C-O-W-E-E-R-E-D, the French army that's really struggling to find its grasp after being devastated by the English over and over again, needed someone who could act, needed a leader. And you've got a girl going out there basically and being willing to fight and die for her people. That's an extremely inspiring thing, but it's also a huge rallying cry to men who have been suffering and struggling for a long time. Anything will do. Any sort of resistance, any sort of grit will do, whether or not the visions are true. And this is a very superstitious time, so people were much more likely to believe in religious ideologies and things like that back then. So it makes sense of how Joan was actually able to rise to such a prominent place and why the French army was willing to support her and give her their loyalty and fealty. And of course, she eventually turned that over to the Dauphin, who became Charles VII, who was the one who basically won the War of the Roses and broke the English hold on the French. How accurate is Braveheart? One of my top 10 favorite movies. Definitely one of my top 10 favorite movies, but it's not super accurate at all. I've mentioned the kilt thing that Shuriken has pointed out to me, but a few other things that are really kind of off the walls. Edward Longshanks was not dead. I don't, when William Wallace was killed, that them dying at the same time. Obviously, William Wallace did not seduce the French princess who was married to the Prince of Wales and her son Edward III became his child. That's definitely not true. That's all romance. The romance there is obviously way out of proportion. We don't know for sure if his body parts were put all over the different areas of Britain, or if he was even drawn and quartered, as we've been talking about before. But basically, as interesting and fun and lovable as a movie as it is, as inspiring and great as a film as it is not an overwhelmingly accurate historic depiction of Scotland at the time or of the British interactions. What they do, British interactions, England and Scotland. What they do well, and they do extremely well, is to show Scottish culture at that time, except for the kilt obviously being a huge loss, but the interaction between the Scottish lowlands and highlands, and the way the Highlanders defended their lands from the English was a huge way that the Scottish had retained their independence. By the way, it wasn't known as Scotland really at the time. I mean, yes, it was the land of the Scots, but it was all, and by the way, prima nocta, the idea that a noble or king can take a newlywed woman and take advantage of her on the first night of her wedding, really didn't happen that much. It's a highly overblown myth from history. But it did happen, but not to the scale that it actually caused William Wallace's wife to die and turned him into this rogue general. But it's a fun and fascinating and enjoyable film, but it's not extremely accurate. And so there's a lot to find disagreeable with it. Magnus, hello, good to see you. I was in Agincourt last summer. I will tell you that the French don't like the history there, and even the pathway to the actual battle site, they don't want you to know of. Yes, it's an extremely embarrassing battle. I mean, the French lost Paris. The French have only lost Paris twice. Once to the British and once to the Germans in the 40s. So they don't want to go back to that. And who would? The Americans cover up the War of 1812 when their capital got destroyed. Did the chivalric code play a part in the French losing at Agincourt? Also feel bad that nobody listened to Bosco. Yeah, that's true, but yeah, there was a little bit of that. But the Welsh longbowmen that the English had, because of Edward Longshanks, who had conquered Wales in the 1280s, 1260s, and 1270s, really was a huge reason. By the way, the reason the heir to the English throne is called the Prince of Wales is because the heir to the throne, Edward Longshanks, the son of King Henry III, conquered Wales and integrated it into the English kingdom in the 1260s, and so he decided to bestow on his son, Edward Cavendish, I'm trying to remember how to say it, the title of the Prince of Wales. And that's why the heir to the English throne has been known as the Prince or Princess of Wales since the 13th century. Stephen the Mad Irishman, my favorite Braveheart character. Yeah, who doesn't love the way that Mel Gibson, I just find this fun. Mel Gibson, who is an Aussie, makes two movies, Patriot and Braveheart, about hating the British and rebelling against them. One is about Scotland with all of its idiosyncrasies, and this one, and he clearly doesn't have any affinity for the English. But then you have just this caricature of the Irish as just even worse in some ways than the Scottish, even more wild and profane and strange and superstitious. And the Stephen character kind of brings out a little bit of an Angloid sort of competition between Britain, Australia, England, Australia, Scotland, and Ireland. Wales is not really mentioned in that, and then Patriot's all about America and the British. So Mel Gibson has it out for the British and other people too. Does the letters Constantine Palaiologos wrote others got saved somewhere? I don't think so. Is that the last emperor of the Byzantines? I believe that's the last emperor of the Byzantines. Constantine I want to say 13th. I don't think they got saved. Vec, hello. I mean, the Ottomans were not going to want anything to survive. Otter, good to see you as always. Yeah, Constantine the 11th. I'm trying to think of another ruler who was their last ruler, who was the 13th. The longbow, what a weapon. David Gam, who died at the battle, was vital to Henry's success. Yes. And Henry V may have been the greatest king in all of British and English and maybe even European history if he had lived and not died of dysentery. If Scotland went through with independence, would they restore a monarchy? I feel like the this point, no, it would just be a regular, boring democratic parliamentary state who go broke and have no. Well, yeah, but they also don't have anyone to be a monarch. The Gaihan, they don't have a potential successor to the throne in Scotland, because the Tudor and Stuart dynasties combined, and you have the English monarch is a descendant of the Scottish monarch. James VI became James I of England. So there you go. If you're liking what you're hearing, and you enjoy your time here, please like and subscribe. Consider maybe a comment, a super chat, becoming a member. All of that stuff helps the channel grow. All the funds you put into this channel helps us grow the channel and bring you more fun, interesting history. So no, Magnus, I don't think that the Ottomans allowed Byzantine archives and documents to survive. We got plenty of North Sea oil, but the English have stolen from us. Yes, that sounds like a Scottishman. What do you think of the Hasidic Jewish dynasty? Do you know about that? The Hasidic Jewish dynasty? Is this the Kafirs argument again? I don't know a huge amount about it. I don't know what you're referring to. The greatest king of England that never became was Edward the Black Prince. Definitely. Also would have been an excellent king had he not died a year before his father, plunging the kingdom into darkness and despair under his incompetent child son, Richard II. It's a true story. Do you think John Adams was misunderstood during his presidency? Yeah, I do. I think that John Adams was extremely thin-skinned and sensitive, and that's why he passed the Alien and Sedition Acts. That's why he had the XYZ affair. That's why he almost went to war with France. But he really kept, even despite pressure from his own party, he did everything in his power to keep the United States from getting into war with France. He did a lot to try to keep the United States out of war. He created the American Navy, but his temper, the Alien and Sedition Acts, where he basically tried to get rid of anyone who was a foreigner, no matter what, under no circumstances, and I believe that's what it did. The Sedition Acts tried to curtail any sort of speech or press in particular, that was critical of his handling of the war or sympathetic towards the English and against the French, and that really stood against the principles of free speech and freedom and free press that Adams had trumpeted when he had helped write the Declaration of Independence and been one of America's founding fathers. Interestingly enough, John Adams did not write the Constitution, which obviously enshrines that in the First Amendment. Did the English kings really take a bath only once a month? Yep, and most likely, yeah, bathing was not a huge priority, and most of them spoke French until the 14th century, and 15th century, really. One thing that interests me very much is to know the superiority muskets hold us against medieval weapons. There's any battle in history that show that superiority, like European nations against others? One thing that interests me very much is to know the superiority muskets hold up against. I mean, you look at the British, I'm trying to remember the name of the battle against the Zulus, but basically the Europeans were able to use very small amounts of men to defeat much larger African forces when they were conquering the continent in the 19th century, because they had superior arms and weaponry. What is your opinion of Sultan Erdogan? Sultan Erdogan. Calling him a sultan's a stretch. He obviously is kind of governed as a dictator in that way, so that's why a lot of people think of him as a sultan. Not too much. Rocky Drift. Yes, that's right. Ozzy, good to see you as always. I mean, Erdogan kind of wants to see himself as the most powerful force in the Middle East and as a liminal juggernaut between the Europeans, the Russians, and the Middle Easterners. He wants to play the middle a lot, but he oftentimes kind of betrays his own side and his own ideas of what he's really going to go for. What does that mean? I don't think he has BB to answer. He's been extremely critical of Israel. He's obviously in favor of a Palestinian state, but Turkey's always been in this fascinating position, especially since the end of the last World War, or as I call it, World War III in the 1940s, when basically, because Turkey was near to the Middle East, and there was a lot of decolonization in the Middle East, and the Soviet Union tried to cause a communist revolution in Turkey, as they did try to do in many other places. The United States moved in and tried and helped avoid that. But Turkey was brought into the European sphere of influence. It's a NATO country because of the pressures from the Soviet Union to spread communism to Turkey, when the predominant part of Turkey is not in Europe continentally, and it is technically considered by many to be more Middle Eastern, if anything. But it's been in that interesting spot of being Western and non-Western at the same time, especially in the last 80 years. And thank you, Eric. Really appreciate the donation. Anything helps the channel. Well, against the Zulus, the British were already using breech loaders. Yes, that's true. That was a step ahead. And when the English settlers first got to this continent, the North American continent, they were at a disadvantage in close combat with their muskets versus, of course, the bow and arrows of the natives, which they were much more adept with because they'd had them for thousands of years as opposed to not as much experience. And the guns were less reliable than a marksman was less reliable than a Native American, especially in close quarters with his bow and arrow. So the idea that the Europeans just showed up everywhere with these muskets and killed everybody immediately is just absurdity. Turkey is a dying country, crazy poverty, not surprised. Can you talk about the USSR trying to invade Afghanistan in the 70s? Why? Thoughts on the rise of Islam in Europe and the potential for civil war? Okay. So let me answer real quickly. 1979, Soviet Union tries to uphold a socialist USSR sympathetic government in Kabul. It falls. A revolution ensues. The Soviet Union sends in its military to back it up, and then, like the Vietnam War, basically turns into fighting the natives in a guerrilla-like tactic. Afghanistan, which had not been successfully held by the British and would be embarrassing the Americans within a few decades, was resilient and defensive, and the Russians were defeated, and it was a huge exposure of the Soviet military and political weakness. It destroyed any idea that they were anti-imperialist because they had just fought their own imperialist war. It lasted for 10 years, and the U.S. basically decided to send weapons and aid to different Afghan freedom fighters. One of the groups was called the Mujahideen, and one of its leaders was Osama bin Laden, who soon after that started the Taliban and Al-Qaeda. Worked with the Taliban, started Al-Qaeda, and of course committed the atrocities at 9/11. So it's interesting. The United States was aiding someone they later turned on, or who turned on them, depending on your perspective. But that's just a basic summation. Kurgan, thoughts on the rise of Islam in Europe and the potential for civil war? I don't think there's potential for civil war. I just think the West is beyond that. It would have to get very, very murky, very, very violent, and very, very dark. I just, with the cultural conflicts that come with any sort of large mass migration, as it has in any historical period, obviously there's painful adjustments, there's fear, there's xenophobia, but there's also resistance. There's clear cases of the differences between Middle Eastern societies and other non-Western societies trying to live in Western cultured areas. The West is responsible for the destabilization of the Middle East in many ways. Does that mean that they're responsible for taking in all of the refugees from that area and caring for them and letting them live no matter what, this way they want? I'm not sure. What I am sure of is that it has created a huge cultural conflict that is probably going to be one of the biggest historical issues of this century. I don't know if it could lead to a literal civil war, but it's pretty bad. And thank you, Eric. I really appreciate that. I'm going to pin that comment, and yes. But an army served with flintlock and less numbers would steamroll a cold weapons army. Yeah, more or less. Smallpox did the killings in the New World for the Europeans. Overwhelmingly, the vast majority of Native Americans who died from disease, and the vast majority of them who died from disease died incidentally, or died because of the contact with the disease, not because the Europeans intentionally tried to kill them. Why do you think Trump hasn't spoken much of the police that got killed in New York City? There was one police officer who got killed. I don't know exactly why he hasn't. Obviously, he's condemned the attacks, but I mean, I don't know. Some people think, I don't know exactly why he hasn't. Makes you think, I guess. I can't really cite a reason and I do news segments here every day. I talk about this stuff all the time. I don't know. Turkey, what you say, Turkey, I don't know what you're saying, Sengiz. How influential was Polish rule during the 16th and 17th century? The Polish became, with Lithuania, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth became one of the most powerful countries in all of Europe, and especially during the early 17th century. They actually successfully conquered Russia for a few years. They were really strong and powerful and only declined with the rise of Russia and Prussia and Sweden, but were pretty dominant in determining Slavic affairs. They were economically prosperous. They bailed out the Europeans several times with Muslim attacks like the Siege of Vienna, where in 1686, King Jan Sobieski on September 11th, that's why that day is important in history, especially for the Muslims, defeated an Ottoman force that was besieging I always forget when. I think it was 1686 and was besieging Vienna. So yeah. Was the American pullout of Afghanistan botched? Did it make the USA look weak? Yes, it did. I remember watching it. It was bad. Have you traveled to Europe before? No, but I really want to. Why did the Ottomans crumble from within? Other than Janissary Shah, did they stay behind Europe in all aspects compared to the rest of Europe? Yes. The Ottomans were backwards compared to the Europeans, and by the 1700s it became obvious that the European powerhouses, France, Great Britain, the Prussians, Austria, and Russia were all stronger than Turkey. And basically the Russians spent all of the early 1800s exploiting this until they exploited it too much, and the British and French stopped them with the Crimean War. But basically under Catherine the Great, Peter the Great, and later under Tsars like Alexander I and Alexander II, the Russians basically turned the Ottoman Turks into the whipping post of the Europeans for the 19th century. That's why they were called, by the Russians, the sick man of Europe. This combined with palace corruption, but also independence and nationalist movements sweeping across Europe, inspiring the Bulgarians, the Greeks, the Serbians, and a bunch of other states that have been part of the Ottoman sphere of influence and empire in the Balkans, southeastern Europe, were gaining their independence at a vast speed. Then the British exploited nationalist independence movements in Arabia during the Second World War, the Great War. You may call it World War I. I think it's the Second World War because I think the 7 Years' War is the first one. I know everybody knows that. I'm just saying that for the newcomers. But basically, Magnus, the Second World War, the Arab Revolt in 1916, where the Palestinian flag comes from, by the way, it's an Arabic flag. That was enough to basically crumble the Ottoman Empire from within. And it had been declining for a long time. It had lost all of its territories in North Africa to the African movements and then to the Europeans. It had lost almost all of southeastern Europe. In fact, the map that the Ottomans were accepted at first was really bad. And Kemal Ataturk, when he established the Republic of Turkey, created a much better arrangement with the Europeans that basically brought Turkey a lot closer to the Europeans in international relations, and gave them more land, and that they didn't lose. So there you go. Why did the Russians get whooped so badly by the Germans in the Great War? The main reason for it, Kurgan, is the Russians were ill prepared, and the Kaiser did everything in his power to stop them. You had great generals like Paul von Hindenburg. Yes, the Paul von Hindenburg who put Hitler in power. I'm very well aware of who he is. He had that extremely great victory. Forest. It was one of the big victories. The Galician campaign was I believe it was Galicia, was a huge loss for the Russians. The Russians could trounce the Austro-Hungarians, but could not trounce the Germans, and the Germans knew that. The fear was that if the Germans didn't go to war with the Russians by 1917, Russia would be industrialized enough to be able to thwart them. The Russians did not have a market economy. The Russians did not have heavy industry. The Russians were backwards by almost every major factor compared to the Germans when it came to military and technological advancements. And because of that, they were mincemeat for the German army, although they did win some battles, believe it or not. Would you say the 7 Years' War is the First World War? Yes, absolutely. Like the Ottomans stayed behind technologically, societal, and economic. Already answered that. Turkey is ambassador. Who is ambassador? Israel ambassador killing children, 1917. What are you talking about? Cambodia-Vietnam War, do you know the reason it went on for 10 years? Yes. The Cambodian communists were so extreme that communists from Vietnam went in there and overthrew Pol Pot, and that caused a war for 10 years. If that's the one you're referring to. I mean, you have different societies and kingdoms existing in that region at different points of history that a lot of people in the West don't know about, like the Khmer Empire in Cambodia, the Dai Viet in Vietnam, that both of whom were able to repel the Mongols, believe it or not. Of all people, the Mongols were never able to capture or control southeastern Asia. Yeah, interesting as in genocidal maniac. I'll take that, yes. Let me see. Thank you, Virginia Woolf, but I'll like it a lot more. I can get even more handsome if you like and subscribe. And nice reference to literature. But yeah, does anyone have any more questions? Actually, I've caught up to the chat. We're a half an hour in. My moderators are not here today, but that's okay. I'm holding down. Everyone seems to be behaving themselves for the most part, so I really appreciate it. And it's great seeing all of you, by the way. Hope you're enjoying your Friday, Saturday, whatever you are in. Maybe it's August 2nd already for you, but I'm glad you decided to start the 8th month of the year with me here at the Friendly Neighborhood History channel. And if you enjoy history, remember to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Why didn't the Russians industrialize earlier? Why did they get stuck in a backwards economy? Russia has gone through this a long time, and Russia was industrializing, but not at the rate of the Europeans. There was not as much incentive for their peasantry and to industrialize and for them to create a middle class, because the vast majority of Russia was farmland. The vast majority of Russian people were peasants, and when you have such huge amounts of people with huge amounts of farmland, it's hard to incentivize production after centuries of being stuck to the land. Literally, serfdom only ended in Russia in 1861, which meant that before then, when countries like Britain and France and the United States were industrializing, even Germany was industrializing under the Prussians, under Bismarck, the Russians were basically kind of just stalling. They had very primitive industry. And it wasn't until the 1860s, 70s, and 80s they really started to get going with the industrialization of their country, and that wasn't enough to catch them up to the Germans and the British and the French. So take all of the industrialization of the 19th century, the first 50 years of it, but the British especially, then later the Americans, then the French, then the Germans all participated in, and compare that to the Russians, who had provincial amounts of that, and then finally started to get going and started to urbanize with growing cities like Vladivostok in the east, where the Trans-Siberian Railroad ended. You obviously have Moscow and St. Petersburg and Kiev, or Kiev, which was part of the Russian Empire at the time. The real truth of the matter is the Russians were horrifyingly backwards, socially, economically, and technologically. And a few decades of catch-up wasn't enough to get them there. They didn't have political emancipation. They didn't have incentives. They didn't really have unionization. They were very, very backwards by all standards of economic and workers' rights developments at the beginning of the 20th century. And when you don't have proper strictures in place to actually give your workers the right space to work in, you're not going to get a lot of people who want to work. And also, when you've conquered so much of the world to protect yourself from invasion, which is the total Russian psychology of their invasion, it's why they're in Ukraine right now, you're going to have a problem with actually tending and taking care of that land, because so much of it is farmland, and the way you've existed for 500 years is as a farming community. So forcing them to industrialize was not for that time. It was for Stalin 15 years later. Anything on the Holy Roman Empire? It was neither holy nor Roman nor an empire. Started off as an actual German empire. The Pope would crown this ruler. It was usually the king of the Germans. It broke off from Charlemagne, but eventually ensuing disputes with different Holy Roman emperors eventually made it an elected position in the late Middle Ages. The Habsburgs had their time with it. Maximilian I, Maximilian II, and of course Charles V, the guy who put Martin Luther on trial. But yeah, kind of fizzled out into nothing and was very ceremonial. And then Napoleon just thought it was stupid and got rid of it. What were the cultural distinctive between the Aztecs, the Mayans, and the Inca? The Incas were in South America, so their culture was much different. The Incas built their cities in hills so that they could be closer to the gods, see their enemies coming, and it was easier for them to farm and do terrace farming that way. They also felt it was better for their llamas. But, and if you don't know about that, watch this amazing documentary called The Emperor's New Groove. But, literally, he's an Incan emperor. The Aztecs and Mayans were similar because they were Mesoamerican, meaning Central American, before the arrival of the Europeans. The Mayas were advanced in mathematics, science. They had technology. They had cities. They built large temples and pyramids. And they eventually died out due to climate change, probably wars with other groups, intermarrying and intermingling with them, and just mostly vanished. And the Aztecs were one of the peoples that emerged in the vacuum of power the Mayans had left and developed an empire that basically relied on tributary states like the Toltecs and the Zapotecs to continue to support them. And the best way you could support them was by giving them slaves. When you won a war against your enemy, the best way to depopulate them was to demand that they give over their people as slaves. Many of these slaves were sacrificed to the different Aztec gods, like Quetzalcoatl. So there's a little bit of the distinctions there. Aztecs very warlike, Incas completely different. They're in a different continent altogether. And by the way, the Aztecs and the Incas, people like to talk about them like they were these established empires that had controlled these areas for centuries. They didn't control all of the land. The Aztecs never controlled all of Mexico or Guatemala. The Incas never controlled all of Peru. They controlled huge sections of Peru and other countries, but they didn't control all of it. It was the Spanish who eventually crystallized control over these huge swathes of land. But they'd only been around for about a century or so before the Spanish showed up. History of eugenics. Did it come up in Germany or before? Eugenics has existed throughout human history, believe it or not, much longer than the Germans and the Nazis. The Nazis got their ideas from people. Eugenics comes from a Greek word that means good genes, literally good raising of you, or what is preferable, would be their interpretation of it. Basically, in the 19th century, it became popular because of social Darwinism, which basically said that the more developed technologically and wealthy societies were advanced, wealthy, and technologically astute because they were better than the more primitive societies that they conquered, the Aborigines in New Zealand, or the Native Africans that were colonized by the Europeans. The Native Americans were destroyed, and rightfully so, according to this logic, because they were inferior to the Western Europeans and Americans who conquered them. So provincial societies either needed to be destroyed or they needed to be controlled, and they needed to be shown what was good and right. And white people were not only socially and culturally superior, they were physically superior because they had better genes than those people. And these are not the Sydney Sweeney genes, these are actual genetic genes. These genes, because they were better looking and better off, there are some races that were better, and because of that, the eugenics movement basically said that certain races should be prioritized in breeding and reproduction over others. And it would be better off if other races died off and the white race in particular continued and grew and all of that stuff. Yeah. And much love and respect to you and No Way Affiliated. Thank you so much for that donation. Fun fact, according to what I read, the greatest jump in gross national product by Russian nation ever experienced up to today was between 1977 and 1914. 1907 and 1917. Yes, the Russians were developing, and that's what the Germans were afraid of. It wasn't like the Russians weren't developing at all, but it was a lot harder for them, and everybody knew the cycle. Russia fell behind, then it developed like a madman, and then it was better than everybody else for a little while, then it fell behind again. This had happened with Peter the Great, it happened with Catherine the Great, it happened with Alexander II. The Germans weren't going to wait around for it to happen under Nicholas II, and that's why they struck. Are any huge Holocaust, except for the most famous one? I've heard of 10 million Ukrainians died from starvation, the American Holocaust, any ever forgotten in history. I'm not going to use the term Holocaust. I'll use the term genocide. There's massive genocides all throughout human history. The most systematic and the largest, because populations were a lot larger and the technology was more devastating and it was easier to kill people, was obviously the genocides of the 20th century. You have the Rwandan one, you have Armenia, the Ottomans killed off millions of Armenians, Christians, Greeks, and Assyrians. You have the Great Famines of Mao, you have the killing fields of the Khmer Rouge. So yes, it's amazing how much natural resources the Russians actually have. You guys should all check out my series on Russian history that I'm doing. It's a short series. I update every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, so I'll have a video out today. And I have a series on Russian czars and a tier ranking of Russian czars you can all go check out if you want to learn more about Russian history, which is my expertise. So what do you think happened to the disappearance of the Roanoke colony? I think they were killed off by the natives. That was the idea that that Powhatan had. So there you go. Search up Pedro II, the magnanimous great guy. Isn't that the emperor? Isn't that the guy who basically declared Brazil an empire and split it off from the Portuguese because everybody hated his parents? Yes, the Bengal famine was probably the biggest Holocaust to have happened. No, it wasn't. It was bad, but it wasn't the worst. Do you know anything about Comancheria? Not exactly. Just an addendum, your shorts are lacking in audio quality. I'm trying everything I can to make them better and improve them. If you want to help me improve it and help me get a better microphone, donate to the channel. Pedro, okay. So who are you referring to? Pedro II was his son, I'm assuming? The Emperor of Brazil? Because Pedro I, basically, the Portuguese royal family fled to Brazil, and the Brazilians got so sick and tired of them that they demanded independence, and instead of having a huge revolution, their son, Pedro I, basically said, you know what, I'll take over, and got mom and dad's permission to rule Portugal as his own empire starting in 1821. Dom Pedro I, and really interesting guy. I think he was only 22 when that happened. People did things a lot sooner because they knew they died a lot sooner. So, thanks, but no thanks. My lips are used for history talking. Let's see. Does anyone have more questions about history or social studies? Pedro lost the throne when he finally signed the law to end slavery. Interesting. That sounds about right. Believe it or not, there were countries that did not need a giant civil war of hundreds of thousands of people dying in order to free their slaves. Yes, I'm aware of this. Why wasn't the Bengal famine the worst? It was because the British are exempt from colonial crimes they committed? No. The British committed more colonial crimes than anyone because they had more colonies than anyone. No, they're not any more exempt from it, any more so than any of the other genocides in human history. Very few people know about the Bengal famine, but it's not worse. It isn't I don't even think it's on quite the same par as the Holocaust, Holodomor, or the killing fields, or 40 million people dying in China because Mao starved them. I think that's worse. I think that's a lot more people. About 3 million people died in the Bengal famine. It could have been avoided, but the pressure from the Japanese forced the British to redirect resources to the front. And that basically, the prioritization of resources, the rationing system, all of this basically blocked India from receiving the food it needed, so there was a large famine that killed millions of people. Who conquered the Philippines? The Spanish did the Philippines are named after King Philip II of Spain. They were conquered in the 1560s. They've been conquered by several different tribal groups. I don't know a huge amount about the history of the Philippines. Eventually the United States conquered it, put it under new management no matter what Emilio Aguinaldo wanted, and then in the 1940s finally gave it its independence after the last World War. The Third World War, in my opinion. Have you heard of a Rhythm Zero experiment by Marina Abramovic? No, I have not. Sounds interesting. Enlighten me. Why did Latin exist for so long? And then why did it randomly break out into multiple different languages? The decentralization of Roman power and control basically meant that there was no lingua franca anymore. That was one of the reasons why people believed it was the Dark Ages, was because you had a breakdown in power and control. And because you had a breakdown of power and control, you had these cultures were all kind of thrown on their own and said, okay, you've got these groups of barbarians running your country. Now you need common unifying ties to your society and your culture. Christianity was one of them, and the development of their own distinct languages with their own twists on Latin based on their own tribal histories was what emerged. And that's where you get French, Spanish, and Italian, which is very close to Latin. But you also get the English language and the German language, which do have some Latin influences, the English more so than the German, because a lot of English words are from the French, because the French conquered England in 1066 under the Norman Conquest, although it wasn't the French government per se, it was the French Duke, William of Normandy, better known as William the Conqueror. Romania actually has a Latin-based language. It's the only Eastern European country that has one, I believe so. So there you go. Yes. What about crypto? Let me see here. Have you heard? Let me see. Funnily enough, of all the slaves coming to the Americas, 50% came to Brazil. Yes, the vast majority of slaves were in Brazil. Portugal was the first one to engage in the slave trade, and they had the most economic success from it. Have you ever played the game Sid Meier's Civilization 6? I've played a couple of them. I've never gotten into Civilization. I prefer Empire Earth. Partition of India and Pakistan was so grossly mishandled by the British. Yes, but you have to remember the Americans were pressuring the British to give up its colonies as fast as possible. Yes, that wasn't the Bengal famine, by the way. Looking that way, we didn't lose much, but we did lost the greatest statesman our country ever had. Fair enough. And Magnus, thank you for joining us. I'm assuming you're from Brazil. Yes, I will get right on that cryptocurrency. The Patriot movie was really good. Tayyib, good to see you as always. Always a pleasure. Top 3 historical movies. Oh, geez. It's tough because it's not just it's tough because it's not just history, it's also quality of a movie that is made. I'm not going to say the top 3 accurate ones. I think the top historical movie I'd have to say is Schindler's List. I think it manages to be accurate enough while also being an excellent movie. I need to watch more historical movies that are more accurate. I'm not saying Schindler's List is perfect. I'm saying it's extremely good. I definitely would put Braveheart there. but because of its lack of accuracy, I don't know what to put. I don't know whether to put it second or third. And third, I would say Gladiator, but Gladiator really isn't historically accurate at all. But they're good historical movies in the sense that they've got a lot of history around them. Gladiator is almost to the point of historical fiction when you consider Maximus really didn't exist. But obviously you have Commodus and Marcus Aurelius and all that stuff. So yeah, those would be my three. What causes giant civilizations to fizzle out? Mayans, Romans, how can a sophisticated society fall into unuse when people return to the wild? Overpopulation, corruption and greed, lack of domestic production, the lack of ability to work with other countries, the failure to actually low birth rates are obviously part of it. Loss of the traditions that made your empire an empire in the first place. It's like not only your leaders and rulers and political elite, but also all of the people in your society seem to lose track of what made them a great and powerful society and rest on their laurels. Those all are part of it. I mean, the Romans are the best example of this, but the Yuan dynasty in China had the same thing happen. It's the reason the Mongols fizzled out. Another reason is overexpansion. Any empire that overexpands, as almost all empires tend to do, is bound to depreciate and fall apart at some point because the native peoples are not going to remain trudged down underfoot forever. The British learned this, the Mongols learned this, the Russians learned this, kind of, and the Romans learned this. The Russian Empire is interesting because it really never had that many colonies. Have you seen the House of Rothschild movie? No, but I probably should. What, let me see. Countess Buffery, was she that bad, or did she hunger? The idea that she bathed in the blood of innocent virgins, Madame Marie Bathory, I don't think that she was really that bad. It's interesting, the blood countess, I think was she called. I think it's an exaggeration. It's just, there's got to be a bogeyman for people. Obviously, the idea of a vampiric murderer or a powerful person being totally debauched and evil and crooked and killing people is obviously quite saucy even today, but especially 500 or 600 years ago. Obviously, you have to think about who wrote the history. Is it her political enemies? I'm going to say it's probably a 2 out of 10. I think there's some accuracy to that there was this woman countess who was a serial killer, but when you consider all of the legends that actually surround her, it's crazy. So basically, she stood for 6 hours with a group of strangers, and there were 70 objects that they could use on her and do what they wanted. Started off cordial, then went dark. Social. Oh my goodness gracious! I don't want to know if I want to know more about this social experiment. Sounds crazy. Sounds like what the Soviets did in Romania. Disease, plagues can kill off societies. But if a society is strong enough, it can survive from a plague. I've been here before. You probably don't remember me. I remember the leather armchair and the beautiful lamp. Yes, that was a different location. We are in a different studio now. But yes, Magnus, I remember you. It's great to have you here again. And Rando, it's you. I'm so glad you're here. What's the origins of communism? Was it really Marx, or were there communist societies before that failed? You have Utopia, Robert Owen. I think it was Robert Owen was his name. You have Thomas More writing a Utopia. You have The Republic by Plato. You have people who would, even the New Testament has been accused of this, who might have proto-communist ideas, at least in some people's minds, in ancient societies, but really there were communes, there were communitarian living societies. Robert Owens is an example of this in America in the 1820s and 30s. This idea of having all goods in common, no private property. These have been tried all throughout, even in small communities, throughout the centuries in different areas. I think that communism as an economic system got its systematic theology from Marx. And the reason I call it systematic theology is because although there were Christian scholars and writers who believed in predestination before John Calvin, John Calvin developed a systematic theology called Calvinism. And so Marx kind of gave it the systematic structure that it needed. It was really an economic system, but it's become a social system and a political system too, of redistribution of wealth, no public property, emancipation of women, all of these different things where Marxism has been reinterpreted to fit cultural, social, and political scenes, not just economic ones. The Old Testament is very pro-community, I guess, human greed. Community I'm not going to say anyone who wants to live in, I don't know if everyone who lives in communal living or advocates for communal living is a communist or is communism. I think communism is one form of that. Communitarianism is the word we usually use for it. People have been pro-community, wanting to help the community, wanting the community to help people. That's not necessarily communism. It's one of the most aggravating arguments I hear in American politics, and I hear it from both sides when people say, if you like firefighters, you're a socialist. Yes, I am, which is why you need to get rid of. If the government ever gives you a tax rebate, you're a socialist because the government gave you money. I think that's such stupid malarkey that really is an insult to socialism. I don't think Social Security is socialism. I really don't. Capitalism with a hint of socialism. Yeah, it's like not every government program is socialism. I find it a huge exaggeration. I know the U.S. is not the first country with a stock market. No, the British, the Dutch, many Europeans, there was even stock and credit in ancient Rome. But basically, capitalism is Marx's term to identify free market economics or money market economics. Any sort of system that has the market running the economic system is capitalistic. But also, all systems that rely on money are technically capitalistic because capital is money. But the free market, whatever you want to call it, if you want to call it capitalism, that's just an easy fix-all that we could just use. Although capitalism is really a pejorative term, like the term Christian was originally a pejorative term. Capitalist and Hebrew was a pejorative term for the Jews. There's a lot of pejorative terms that then become like the common use of word for that group, or idea. But capitalism has existed in many different societies, but the modern form of capitalism requires a mechanized society almost as much as Marxism requires a mechanized society. Yeah, I don't believe Social Security is one nation Trotskyism. I think you're just trying to make a joke, and it's not funny. I'm sorry, Vincent. I will return your heart when you return my money. The Astros cheating scandal is overblown. They did nothing wrong. Hot take of the day. Ow, that is a big hot take, especially for the Dodger fans who will kill people if they don't like them. It's true. Has there ever been a successful communist or socialist countries, or do they just suppress the population and carry out mass murder? Jeez. I don't want to say all socialists are communists and all socialist countries are communist. Obviously, there are social democracies, which might be a better term even than socialism, in Scandinavia that are very successful. People live longer and are happier than they are in the United States, for example. That doesn't necessarily make them fully socialistic. Take with that what you will. They have high taxes. They have welfare and social programs everywhere. They have maternity leave. They have all of these programs in place. Many European countries are like this. They also have high taxes, but Sweden and the Scandinavian countries, which are often cited as socialist paradise, have a lot of economic freedom. They're not necessarily fully socialistic. There's definitely more of a mixed market economy, far less socialistic, and there's private property, which is not really a tenable thing in socialism and certainly not in communism. Social Security is not socialism because it takes more from you than what you take out. Vaya got a story to tell you about communism. And by the way, socialism and communism were the same term for the same ideology until the 1920s, by the way. Hardly a free market these days, considering megacorps like BlackRock, Vanguard, and that's corporatism. That's the corporations own everything. That's the fear of the monopoly state. Let me see. Let me see if I'm missing any. Okay, I think I've answered everyone's questions. I hope I haven't missed anyone. 90% of all asset class, they control the entire market: stocks, real estate, gold, crypto. That's true. That's definitely true. If you were to write a fanfic about a perfect society, what form of government would you describe it with? Benevolent dictatorship. Yes, believe it or not, a benevolent dictatorship tends to work well for most people, probably with some sort of parliamentary system, constant, like a very light shade of ceremonial monarchy, maybe even. It'd be Republican, not capital Republican. It'd be a lowercase Republican, but it'd be representative, but it would have some sort of figure executive. I'm not saying the United States got this right. I'm saying it would be somewhat close, but yeah, it's tough. It's a hard one for me to do. I hope you're enjoying the class, Beck. There are classes people can enjoy. Well, you can own BlackRock, just buy their stock. I have BlackRock stock. Nobody likes their stock today because of the economy. The economy just took a drop. But oh well. Hello, Timeless. You are aware that the likes of Benjamin Disraeli felt Social Security, giving a bit back to the masses, was ideal to protect the status quo and to prevent revolution. Yes, that is not so. Disraeli, Theodore Roosevelt kind of felt that way. Mussolini certainly felt that way. The truth of the matter is that Social Security programs, things like this, there are capitalists and even conservatives who believe that some concessions need to be given by the government to help people that can't. And I mean, most conservatives would say this, at least publicly, that to help people who need it, and that's a good thing, and that should not be ever compromised or gotten rid of. And even capitalists would be in favor of that. That's not socialism. Anything about the Great Depression and margin investing, the source, yeah, there's several sources. The austere monetary policy, the margin investing, the way too much credit loaning, not people not owning anything because of all the crediting was a huge part of it. Any rock and roll history? Ozzy really the first metal band with Black Sabbath? What about Coven or other bands? Not too much. I mean, the first band that ever won a heavy metal Grammy was Jethro Tull, who has a flute player. I hate the fact that Trump is spending money on a ballroom and jet with money that he could have been used for medical and emergency aid. Yes, but it's not your money if you're an American. Actually, everyone has been pointing this out, and I'm getting furious about hearing it because it's just so tiresome. I mean, the way people all over the world like to attack Donald Trump is just the stupidest stuff because they make up things. There's so many good things to attack him for, and they just come up with bad things. He isn't using taxpayer dollars to fund the ballroom. That was a lie. It's all either personally funded or by donations. It's not, oh, he's stealing from children so that he can pay for a lavish ballroom. Nonsense. I mean, hate him if you will, but that's a bad argument. We have flight logs for Epstein but no other videos? I don't know what we're going to get for Epstein. I'm getting to the point where I'm just like, I hear about it every day. There's always an update. I get tired of talking about it on my news updates. There's a lot going on. I just don't think we're ever going to get the whole thing. I believe you, Don Wildo. I'm pretty sure I'm going to check that out. No, it's not taxpayer funded. You could say, yeah, you're doing this, and that's kind of a gaudy, stupid thing. That's a fair argument, but people just use bad faith arguments, and I think this is why people dislike him, but they dislike Democrats more if you look at U.S. polling, which isn't trustworthy. But, I mean, it's true. They said he was going to lose twice, and he won twice. They said he was going to get his rear handed to him in 2020, and he barely lost. That's scary. The truth of the matter is, if you look at what actually happened, if you look at what the thing is, the false narratives that are drummed up when there are so many true narratives that could be used is a huge reason why people call me a Trump supporter, even though I'm just literally just saying what's true and what's not true. Yeah. A lot of funds filled with this site, but people call me a left-wing nut job too, so I get both sides attacking me, which means I must be doing something right. As a historian in social sciences who's trying to be in the middle on as much as I possibly can be and as objective as I can on this channel. We pride ourselves on our objectivity. They are holding the decision something shady is going on with XRP. Interesting. I'll have to look into that. Mesoamerican pyramids, World Heritage Sites. Have you been to any? No, but I need to go to more of them. There are more pyramids in Meso and South America than there are in Africa. True story. All right, I'm going to wrap it up. If anyone, please be sure to like and subscribe if you haven't. I'll answer this last question from Rando because I so appreciate seeing you and having you here. I appreciate all of you being here and taking time out of your day to join me and getting questions answered and learning some history and talking about it with me. If I was to invest, would be in silver. Yeah. I'm going to take a drink probably after I finish this. I got to go do I probably won't go to Instagram right away because I got to do my Macbeth video, which I'm really excited about. Are the Israeli funding kicking illegal immigrants out and Epstein file list true then? I don't know if the Epstein file, I don't know what you mean by that. Epstein list true. I don't know if there's a client list in the sense that there's a list of people's names. I've explained this before. There are files, and in those files, there will be people named. Some of those people will have done horrifying things that are despicable, and they should go to prison for the rest of their lives, and maybe even worse should happen to them. Other people are or might have been involved in dark money exploits, money laundering, and other crimes that, white collar crimes where they will go to prison for a long time. And then there's another group of people who were associated with him and didn't have anything to do with him. The Virginia Giuffre story turned out to be a nothing burger. She said Trump had nothing to do with her. I'm still waiting because it's been less than a month. It's barely August. It was after July 4th that we found out about the Epstein memo. We don't know what's actually going to happen there. It's kind of crazy and all over the place. And I'm just waiting because I'm just not going to, because I've been, what's going to happen? And now I'm just like, okay, we'll find out when we find out. If we find out, we're not going to find out the whole story. It'd be nice if we found out a lot of it, but we're not going to find out the whole thing. And governments cannot be fully transparent. It's just not in their nature to be fully transparent. And there might, who knows what other implications there are national security wise and things like that. But yes, I'll go over to Instagram right now if anyone wants to join me there and talk some more history. Friendly_history1, friendly_history1. And are the Israel funding kicking illegal immigrants out? You're talking about the settlement in the West Bank. They are doing that, and it's getting worse, unfortunately. Okay, last question. Do aspects of the Eastern Roman Empire still exist in modern society? Justinian's legal code was the law de jure for the Europeans for 1,000 years. Napoleon built on it. So yes, in many ways, common law, and the Napoleonic Code, which are two of the biggest law codes in the world that have inspired people all over the world, including the United States, did indeed come in some part from Justinian's law code. And of course, the Orthodox Church is one of the biggest Christian denominations. So there you go. All right, thank you so much. I will see you guys tomorrow. We will be here at 6 p.m. Eastern. Really looking forward to that. Take care, and remember,